Hello and welcome to Roundtable. An alternative to cigarettes that still involves tobacco is on a European Union hit list. These cigarette substitutes once promised a new way to smoke without any of the obvious health risks. But now, the European Commission wants to ban what are called flavoured heated tobacco products. Not vaping, but one of the major concerns is that many products initially advertised as a way to help smokers quit are simply becoming the newest route to addiction for the young. Even in the case of vaping, which is described as being safer than heated tobacco, there is growing evidence of a link to cancer. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Pretty much everybody nowadays knows that smoking is not good for you. And that is why tobacco companies came out with new products in futuristic casings and delicious new flavours, they say, that promised to be safer. But are they safe enough? In 2020, the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention said there'd been 2,807 cases of lung injuries linked to e-cigarettes or vaping, among them 68 deaths. Meanwhile, Europe has decided that a ban on heated tobacco products should be a big part of its efforts to fight cancer. The European Commission wants to ensure that less than 5% of the population uses tobacco by 2040, and making it harder to get hold of those sleek, attractive cigarette alternatives, it believes is one of the ways to do it. But should all of them be banned? Or is that overestimating the danger they're said to pose? Let us take a breath, so to speak, and joining us to discuss this in London, we have Leon Shahab, Professor of Health Psychology at University College London. Also in London, John Dunne, Director General of the UK Vaping Industry Association. And in Kingscliff, Australia, Matthew Peters, a respiratory physician, lung doctor, if you like, and former Director of Action on Smoking and Health. You might know it better by the acronym ASH. Great to have you all with us. John, I'm going to come to you first of all, because we're talking about heated tobacco products and e-cigarettes, vaping. There is a difference, and I would like you, for the benefit of our viewers, to explain what it is.
Absolutely. The big difference between heated tobacco or heat not burn products and vaping is that heat not burn products contain tobacco, but they're heated to 144 degrees, I believe, which is just below the point of combustion. So they create a vapor, but they don't actually burn anything. Whereas vaping devices use a combination of vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol, and various flavorings to create a vapor that smokers use.
And that is with a heated coil, isn't it? I wonder if your concern is, representing the vaping industry, that if heated tobacco products are banned by the EU, and there are some restrictions already in the United States, you think the next step might be to ban or try to ban vaping?
No, I don't see that happening. Vaping has become, at least here in the UK, the number one way that people actually give up smoking. And we have a government here in the UK that's actually pushing for more vaping. They want to see vaping increase by about 40% over the next couple of years to reach their smoke-free target of 2030. But I think where some of the concern is coming is whether young people are taking up these products that have never previously smoked. And at least the data I'm seeing here doesn't substantiate that.
Let's talk to Leon, because just before we went on air, I'm not spilling any secrets here, I saw you have a puff on an e-cigarette out of shot. And I want to ask you whether, in fact, you went onto that because you were a smoker and it did help you quit, as John is perhaps suggesting.
Well, my journey was slightly different. I had stopped smoking already, and I went to my hometown of Berlin, and I went out, and I knew that because cigarette smoking is still very prevalent there and allowed in bars, that I might be tempted back to cigarettes. So in order to not go back to cigarettes as a preventative measure, I started using e-cigarettes.
So it worked in that case, did it?
It has, yes.
Okay. Do you understand that there are risks involved with vaping? the other alternatives to cigarettes and cigars? Do you know that there are risks?
Yes, of course, nothing is entirely risk-free. However, it's always important when we talk about e-cigarettes, I think, to talk about what they're replacing, and these are cigarettes. Cigarettes are uniquely dangerous product, which kill half of the people who start using them. So e-cigarettes, by comparison, are much less harmful.
And you smoked for how long?
I smoked for around 12 years.
And do you think that what you're using now is as addictive as cigarettes were to you? Will you be able to quit vaping?
I'm not at the moment planning on quitting vaping. That might be something that happens in the future. Research, I mean, if I talk about myself personally, I would say that it's unlikely. They're not as addictive for me as cigarettes were, I don't think. So I can go large space of the day without having to vape. And research, if you look at people's self-description, how dependent they are, how soon after waking up they use an e-cigarette compared with cigarettes, also suggests that they are less addictive. They're still addictive, but they're less addictive than cigarettes, because cigarettes are a very efficient nicotine delivery system.
Matthew, let me come to you. You're a lung doctor. Do you see damage in, it doesn't have to be just young people, in anybody who vapes, as well as in those who smoke cigarettes or heated tobacco products? Do you see lung damage?
Vaping is harmful to lungs. It's an unnecessary exposure of an uncertain and variable cocktail of chemicals. If its only claim to fame is that it's not as bad as cigarette smoking, well, that's a pretty tenuous claim.
In what sense is it harmful?
In what sense is it harmful? Well, anybody that tells you they know with certainty how dangerous vaping is shouldn't be listened to, because nobody knows. We have not had adult exposures, or child exposures actually, for a sufficiently long period to be confident about where harm sits. It's just not known. The product is in constant evolution. In the UK, which you're mainly talking about here, and the experience of the co-panelists, they have a particular experience with a low nicotine vaping environment. In other countries where higher concentrations of nicotine are allowed, the situation is very different, and that's what's emerging in my country.
Okay, let me read out something from the Center for Disease Control in the United States. Scientists still learning about that is e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products, short and long-term health effects, additional research needed to understand the health effects of heated tobacco, etc., etc. And yet you say they are harmful. Once again, I'll ask you, in what way are they harmful?
In what way are they harmful? Well, there's an increased risk of pneumonia. There's actually very little in the way of longitudinal studies. There was a 2-year study done with an earlier generation device, the Puritane device, about the only long-term study that's looked at lung side effects. Obviously, I'm a lung doctor, and what you saw over a period of 2 years of use was 5% loss of a critical aspect of lung function. There's no other comparable study that's proven that's not the case. They just take a healthy group of 35-year-olds, make them use this stuff for 2 years, see what happens to their lungs. So at the moment, that stands as the best prospective study of record, if indeed vaping is going to be used long term.
Let me throw. I'm sorry. Carry on. Yeah.
I would say is that's with long-term use. Now, if vaping is used for a short period of time to affect a transition from smoking to non-smoking, then the whole risk-benefit equation changes dramatically.
Okay, so if it helps you quit, that's a good thing. I want to put this to you, John Dunne. This is a young man in the United States who says that vaping caused him to be extremely sick, and then we'll hear from a doctor who was treating him. He actually went into a coma. He says this was the result of doing too much, too often.
Throughout my entire sickness, I did not want to believe that it was the vapes. It wasn't until I woke up after the 3-day coma that both the doctors and my mother told me what had happened and what caused me to be in the coma.
It takes smokers many years to develop the lung damage And the lung damage they have is usually irreversible damage that doesn't get better. This seems to be more of an inflammatory response of some kind, very, very quick on onset, and seems to go away relatively quickly as well. So it seems to be a very different type of illness than long-time smokers get.
So a young man who says he was made seriously ill, but the doctor says the long-term damage isn't as great. Would you admit that there are health risks, having heard that?
Well, as you know, the two previous speakers have pointed out, vaping is not 100% safe. It is far safer to use vaping devices than it is to smoke. But it's very interesting with the US because it seems to be the only country in the world that I'm seeing these type of reports. And we had this in 2019 where there was a huge big scare for about 2 or 3 months around EVALI, which turned out to be totally proportioned to the use of vitamin E acetate in THC, which is a derivative of cannabis. So it wasn't nicotine vaping that was causing this issue, it was THC and cannabis.
Do you think that what the European Union is proposing here is proportionate, or is it a knee-jerk reaction to some kind of social pressure that non-smokers, such as campaigners, perhaps such as Matthew from Action Smoking and Health, ASH, are putting on them, rather than a proportionate response to the risks that there are?
Absolutely. I think it is a knee-jerk reaction. And frankly, when I saw that proposal coming out, I don't quite understand where it's coming from. If smokers are switching to less harmful alternatives, whether that be, patches, gums, pouches, heat not burn, or vaping, then they're doing a good thing. So I'm not quite sure why they would target just one specific item.
Okay, well, Matthew, I'm going to read this out to you from a campaign group that is diametrically opposed to ASH. This is Forest, the Freedom of the Right to Enjoy Smoking Tobacco. Simon Clark, encouraging smokers to switch to reduced risk products such as e-cigarettes is sensible as long as it's voluntary and based on educating consumers about the relative risks of different nicotine products. Ultimately, this is about freedom of choice and personal responsibility, and ministers must think very carefully before they adopt prohibition and coercion as tools to achieve their smoke-free goal. Back with you in just a moment, Leon, if I may, but the point that's being made here is that any kind of prohibition, as we saw in the United States back in the early part of the 20th century, can backfire. Is that a concern of yours?
That's a political rhetorical argument that Forrest and Simon Clark have been making for decades every time we've tried to advance public health through various forms of tobacco control. It's rather tedious nonsense. I expect him to come up with it. It doesn't help anybody.
Are you surprised as a lung doctor with the rapid increase, and I think I've got some figures here, in vaping, e-cigarettes and in heated tobacco products? 2011, 7 million e-cigarettes users worldwide. 2018, it had gone up to 41 million. And worldwide vaping sales, they've gone from 15.7 billion in 2018, expected to be 40 billion by 2023. Matthew, are you surprised at how quickly it has become an accepted use of absorbing nicotine?
No, it depends what you mean by accepted. In Australia, I say we have a different experience, and particularly at the moment, we've got patterns of use in high school children approaching 30 to 40%. And what's happening in this country is the advent of cheap, disposable, high concentration nicotine salt devices sourced extremely cheaply from China. They are highly addictive, and Professor Shahab described his own experience, but it would have been with a 2% nicotine device. Our kids are being exposed illegally to 6% nicotine. So it's not that I believe in prohibition. It's just that what's happening in the market in terms of illegal sales and sales to kids in this country, kids that I care about, is that the industry that's making and distributing and selling these is pushing the political direction towards prohibition. It's not coming from us. It's the industry's behaviour that's leading to that. Situation in England may be very different.
You'd be quite happy to see all e-cigarettes, vaping, and all heat-treated tobacco products banned. I mean, obviously you'd like to see cigarettes banned, but I don't know how you go about that at the moment. But you'd like to see these things outlawed.
I'm not out for outlawing anything. There's no other alternative. If I can go down to my local suburb in Sydney, go to a chicken shop, and the chicken shop has got on display illegal, high concentration, highly potent, highly addictive products, and they're making the argument, oh, they don't have nicotine because the nicotine isn't on the label. But they have been tested by our Therapeutic Goods Administration. They contain nicotine. It's all high strength, highly addictive. 10 or 12 puffs of this is equivalent to smoking a Marlboro cigarette. Now, this is not a benign product. If you're selling a non-benign product, you've got to expect some sort of action to be taken.
As a respiratory physician, help me with this one. Nicotine, I know, is addictive, but is it the ingredients in tobacco and the other chemicals that are put into cigarettes that are more harmful to your health, or is the nicotine itself bad for you?
Nicotine, it depends. I mean, we've seen nicotine poisoning. We've seen a trebling of the reports of nicotine poisoning to poison information lines in relation to the vaping devices which are available in this country. So nicotine is intrinsically toxic. We've had kids come into hospital with seizures because we know that's a side effect of high doses. These are pleasant devices for kids to use, they say. So there's not the natural abhorrence that a young person will get when they suddenly start smoking intensively to get that level of nicotine. So there is an immediate toxicity of nicotine. There are the psychological side effects of nicotine, particularly in youth. But by and large, the respiratory harms, as we see it, and no one really knows, are probably related to the range of other chemicals. There's this expression that's used of nicotine vaping. It's a joke. It's just a term used by a clique of people who are trying to promote it. You can't just vape nicotine. You've got to vape the glycerin, you've got to vape the glycols, you've got to vape all whatever flavouring someone decides to put into it. Nicotine vaping, it's just an absolute rubbish expression.
John, you'll have a chance to come back on what you've just heard there from Matthew, but Leon, I've left you out for a little while. I want to ask you to respond to what you've heard from Matthew there in Australia. He says it's, if not as dangerous as cigarettes, it's certainly something that he wouldn't want to encourage anybody to do. How do you get that across? You're a professor of psychology. How do you get that across to people? Because they think they're doing something that's not as dangerous.
Well, I would say they are doing something that's not as dangerous. I mean, to just put this into context, maybe something strange is happening in Australia. In the UK, there are around 3 million users, and we have a yellow card scheme, which means that you have to notify MHRA if there's something going wrong with an e-cigarettes. And so far, the number of cases have been reported is in low hundreds, also, I know people keep going on about the fact that we don't know about the long-term health effects, but e-cigarettes have been around for over 15 years now. One of the key things to remind everybody of is that the main problem with cigarettes is that combustion occurs, and that occurs around 700, 800 degrees Celsius. So you have, 70 carcinogens, 700 or so other chemicals have been found in cigarette smoke, and in cigarette tobacco, and that has turned to over 7,000 chemicals. There's no combustion going on with e-cigarettes. So on the basis of very simple biology, we know already that they have to be less harmful than cigarettes. We've conducted a study, was published a couple of years ago, which looked at well-known, well-characterized carcinogens, so cancer-causing chemicals have been related to long-term health effects such as lung cancer in e-cigarette users compared with cigarette smokers, compared with NRT users, so nicotine replacement therapy, which is a safe product that is prescribed the world over. And what we find is if we look at these key indicators of likely disease later on, that the reductions that are seen in NRT users are similar to those seen in e-cigarette users, much, much lower than what is seen in cigarette smokers. The reduction range between 90 to 60% lower exposure levels. So I don't really accept the argument that there's nothing known about the health effects of e-cigarettes. I think the evidence is quite clear that they're less harmful. Now, the other thing I want to point out is, of course, that I agree, I would not encourage anybody who's not a cigarette smoker to start using e-cigarettes. They're meant to be a harm reduction tool, so move you from cigarettes, the most harmful product, to a less harmful product. And what we have seen is in countries that have adopted a relatively progressive stance, such as the UK, smoking prevalence has plummeted to much greater extent than in countries where e-cigarettes have not been endorsed, for instance, in Australia. So if you look at the changes in smoking prevalence over the last 10 or 15 years, Australia was ahead of the UK in terms of smoking prevalence rates. Now it's behind. So that shows you at population level that e-cigarettes can be used as a tool for good.
Well, it could possibly be because cigarettes in this country cost 3 times what they do in the Balearic Islands or in Greece or wherever it happens to be. I'm going to have to leave you there because I want to come to John on this one. Is there any altruism, you think, in what you are trying to promote? In other words, you'd be taking people away from more harmful cigarettes, or are you simply a booming business? I was mentioning a little bit earlier on, 40 billion is the estimate by 2023. If you truly wanted to help people, you'd give them nicotine patches rather than vaping, wouldn't you?
Well, the first thing to understand is how vaping started off. And vaping started with one consumer talking to another. It didn't start with big businesses. And it's developed around the world by one smoker encouraging another smoker to do it. So that's the first point. The second point is that patches and gums have been around for an awful long time, and they've been extremely ineffective. You're looking at a success rate of in and around about 4 to 8%. And pharmaceutical companies have made millions and millions and millions of pounds because of that point. And along comes vaping, where smokers really can relate to it because it emulates the experience that they had with smoking, but it weans them off the nicotine. And if you look at the amount of
Hang on, it has nicotine in it. It has nicotine in it. It doesn't wean them off that. It weans them off perhaps the tobacco.
It does, but we're talking about 50, 60 milligram products earlier on. Most of the products that are consumed, at least here in the UK, most users are using an open tank system with between 3 and 6 milligrams of nicotine, not 50 and 60 milligrams. But they usually start off on a higher dose and wean themselves down.
Okay, we've got about a couple of minutes left. Matthew, I want to come to you and ask you about Australia's rules compared to some in the rest of the world. Pretty strict in Australia. Do you think that will be emulated across the European Union, United States, et cetera, et cetera?
Firstly, can I correct the previous statement that Australia has not had a fall in smoking rates? The small in smoking rates the fall in smoking rates over time in Australia matches any other major comparator country. That's a nonsense argument. It's incorrect and it has to be corrected.
Well, that's not what I said.
To your question for a
Well,
minute?
that's not what I said.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to correct you there.
Well,
I said
it
the
is what
smoking
you said.
prevalence decrease has...
Just a quickie, Matthew, stop. You just say it, Leon, and then we'll go back to...
Can I just correct what I said? I said that smoking prevalence declines in the recent years has been steeper in the UK than in Australia. That's what I said.
That's what he said. I hope that clears it up. Peter, Matthew, let me...
Clears it up if he wants to keep saying things that are wrong, but that's fine. Okay, so the situation in Australia... The situation in Australia is that we had child smoking, teenage smoking rates down to 3 or 4%. Now, e-cigarette use rates at the moment are around 10 times that, and that is a spectacular failure associated with the illegal availability of vaping products. And you'd have to expect a responsible government who wishes to protect the health of its children to act comprehensively.
Other governments elsewhere do what you are hoping they will do in Australia? Do you think be draconian?
We have an adult approach to e-cigarettes in Australia. That is, you can get a prescription from your doctor, and e-cigarettes can be accessed by a smoker for the purpose of smoking cessation. Now, so it is available. It's not banned, and I don't think there is any intention.
Okay, quick one from you, John, on that one. Matthew, I'm sorry, I keep calling you Matthew and Peter. I'll get it right in a minute. John, let me come to you very quickly. Is that a sensible idea on prescription?
No, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. All you're creating is a potential black market. You're going to get products that aren't registered, they're not regulated in any way. I think it's just ridiculous. Whereas in the UK, we have a highly regulated market. All of the products that are sold here go through the MHRA. We look at the toxicity, we look at the ingredients of those products, and this is why we don't have a problem. Countries that try and do this whole prohibitionist, banning it, save the children approach are really just failing.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Leon. Good to have you on the program. John, equally. Matthew Peters, thank you for coming on from Australia. And once again, apologies for calling you Peter on a number of occasions, but I'm sure you can see the confusion that I had there. Listen, thank you very much indeed, Matthew Peters. Good to have you on. Thank you very much indeed for being with us on Roundtable. Wherever you happen to be watching this program, we thank you too, and we hope you'll take the time and the trouble on another occasion. Until then, goodbye.